The roar of the concrete mixer was the first thing I heard, a grinding, unnatural sound that didn't belong in my quiet corner of the world. Then I saw it. My creek, my beautiful, meandering, life-filled creek, was gone. In its place was a scene of industrial carnage. A crew of workmen were smoothing the last section of a perfectly straight, brutally ugly, gray concrete channel. It was a tomb. A sterile, lifeless trough where my babbling brook used to be. Standing on the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, beaming like she had just unveiled a masterpiece, was Marge, the president of the Chateau Valley Estates Homeowners Association. She saw my truck pull up and waved, a gesture of triumphant pride. "Well, hello, Frank," she called out, her voice bright and cheerful over the din of the machinery. "What do you think of the community beautification project? We had it channelized. No more bugs, no more mess, no more flooding. We fixed your nasty little ditch." Couldn't speak? My mind was a roaring void of shock and white-hot rage, and my feet felt rooted to the ground. I stared at the wet, gray scar they had carved through my property, at the place where, just last week, dragonflies had danced and frogs had sung. She hadn't just trespassed. She hadn't just destroyed my property. She had murdered a living thing. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand why a man would feel this way about a simple creek, you have to understand me. My name is Frank, and for 40 years I was a hydrologist and a civil engineer. My life was water. I studied its flow, its power, its secrets. I designed dams. I engineered floodplains. I consulted on the delicate dance between human development and the relentless patient force of nature. Water was my language, the landscape my textbook. When I retired, I didn't want a beach house or a golf course condo. I wanted a piece of land that was alive, a place where the water was still in charge. I found it in 20 acres of rolling hills and old-growth forest, a property that had been left untouched for generations. The heart of this land, the reason I paid more than I could afford for it, was its water system. A deep, natural spring bubbled up into a crystal-clear, Fiviker pond. From that pond, a single overflow channel, controlled by an old but perfectly functional Castron sluice gate, fed a meandering creek. That creek was my paradise. It was the lifeblood of my property. It wound its way along my back property line, its banks thick with cattails and wildflowers, its waters home to minnows, crawdads, and a chorus of frogs whose songs were the soundtrack to my evenings. It was a complete, thriving, miniature ecosystem. It was perfect. My peaceful isolation lasted for 2 glorious years. Then the bulldozers arrived on the adjacent property, a massive tract of former farmland. Within a year, a new ultra-exclusive community called Chateau Valley Estates had sprung up. It was a monument to manufactured perfection. $1-million homes that all looked vaguely, depressingly the same, each sitting on a lawn so unnaturally green and uniform. It looked like it had been painted on, and the queen of this sterile kingdom was Marge. Marge was the HOA president, a woman whose entire identity seemed to be built on a foundation of absolute control. She saw the world as a series of imperfections that needed to be corrected. And she had the bylaws, the fines, and the unshakable self-confidence to enforce her vision. From the very beginning, my property, and especially my creek, was an affront to her sensibilities. Our first real conversation happened when she cornered me at my mailbox one afternoon. "Frank," A began, her tone that of a patient teacher explaining something to a slow child. "We, the board, have received some concerns from residents about your back ditch." "It's a creek, Marge," I said politely. "It's spring-fed." "Whatever it is," she continued, waving a dismissive hand, "it's a bit of a nuisance. The croaking noises at night are very disruptive to those whose lots back up to it. And frankly, the whole area looks very wild. It attracts pests, mosquitoes, bugs, snakes probably. It's a natural ecosystem, Marge. The dragonflies that live there eat the mosquitoes. The frogs eat the bugs. Now the snakes, if there are any, eat the mice. It's a balanced system. She gave me a blank, uncomprehending stare. It was like I was speaking a foreign language. Well, she sniffed. It's unsightly.
Ow.
It brings down the cohesive aesthetic of Chateau Valley. We would appreciate it if you would. Tidy it up. I knew then that this was not going to end well. You cannot reason with a person who sees a wildflower and calls it a weed. You cannot find common ground with someone who hears a chorus of life and calls it a noise complaint. A week later, the first notice arrived. It was slipped into a plastic sleeve and left on my gate, even though I was not, and never would be, a member of her HOA. It was a formal warning, citing a non-existent county ordinance for maintaining a public nuisance and improper water retention, leading to the harboring of vermin. Oh, the vermin, of course, were my frogs. It was her opening shot, clear message that she considered my property to be under her jurisdiction. The situation escalated dramatically the following week. I was in my workshop when I saw Marge marching along my property line, followed by a man in a jumpsuit carrying a large chemical sprayer. He was from a commercial pest control company. I walked out to meet them, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Can I help you, Marge?" "Yes, Frank," she said, beaming. "I'm here to solve your little pest problem. I've hired this company to treat the ditch. It'll kill all the mosquito larvae and other nasty things. A gift from the HOA. You're welcome." The rage that surged through me was so intense, I felt dizzy. "Get him off my property," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Now, Frank, there's no need to be ungrateful." "Marge," I cut in, my voice hard as stone. "This is my private property. That is a natural spring-fed waterway. If your man here sprays one drop of his poison into that water, I will not only have him arrested for criminal trespassing, I will personally sue him and his company into bankruptcy for violating the Clean Water Act and causing a deliberate environmental contamination event. Do you understand?" Exterminator, who had been listening with growing alarm, took a step back. "He looked from my face to Marge's, ma'am," he said nervously. "I can't spray on private property without the owner's consent, especially not into a live waterway. The fines. The EPA would shut me down." Marge's face went from smug benevolence to a blotchy, furious red. The exterminator, seeing his opening, tipped his hat to me and practically ran back to his truck. "This isn't over." Marge shrieked at my back as I walked away. "I will not have this neighborhood's property values ruined by your swamp." A week later, I found them. A line of little wooden stakes with bright pink ribbons hammered into the ground all along my side of the creek. Survey markers. That evening, a letter arrived from the HOA's lawyer. It was a dense, formal-sounding document, but its message was simple. They were claiming a prescriptive drainage easement over my creek, and they were informing me of their intent to begin a project to improve and stabilize the creek bed for the health, safety, and betterment of the Chateau Valley community. My blood ran cold. Prescriptive easement? That was a legal stretch, but it was a clear sign. She was getting serious. But it was the phrase drainage easement that set off every alarm bell in my hydrologist's brain. Why would they need a drainage easement for my creek? I spent the rest of the night in my office pulling up the original county topographical maps of the area. I found the developer's master plans for Chateau Valley, all available online as public records, and then I saw it, the truth. The sheer, breathtaking criminal audacity of it. Chateau Valley was built on a historic floodplain. The developer had done the bare minimum to mitigate it, which involved installing a massive, interconnected network of storm drains, French drains, and culverts under their streets and pristine lawns. And the topographical map showed in stark, undeniable detail where all those hundreds of pipes led. They all secretly outletted via a series of disguised underground pipes. Directly into my creek. My little creek wasn't just a nuisance to them. It was their lifeline. It was the sole drainage point for their entire multi-million-dollar development. They were illegally dumping their entire community's stormwater runoff onto my property. And Marge, in her infinite ignorance, had no idea. She was so focused on the frogs and the cattails that she had never bothered to ask what the creek actually did. Now I understood. She wasn't just trying to clean up the creek. She was trying to establish a legal claim to it, to retroactively justify their illegal drainage system. My lawyer sent a blistering cease and desist letter back. We pointed out their existing, ongoing, and illegal violation of my property rights. We informed them that any unpermitted work performed on my property would be treated as criminal destruction of property and felony trespassing. And we dropped the bomb. We warned them that interfering with a natural waterway that was clearly a water of the United States was a massive violation of both state and federal environmental laws, and that we had already forwarded the matter to the regional office of the Environmental Protection Agency for review. I felt confident no sane person, no competent HOA board would risk a multi-million-dollar fight. With the EPA, the fines, the remediation costs would be astronomical. It would have to back down. I had to go out of town for a few days to visit my sister. I left feeling secure, believing that the threat of federal intervention had finally put an end to Marge's madness. While I was gone, the storm of the decade hit. A massive front moved through, dumping 6 inches of rain in less than 12 hours. On the second day of my trip, my phone rang. It was a frantic, screaming Marge. "Frank, your creek. It's overflowing," she shrieked. "The water's backing up into our new Central Park. It's a flood. You have to do something." I was completely confused. My creek had never flooded. It had a wide natural floodplain. "That's impossible, Marge. The creek is fine." "It is not fine. You have to come back and fix it. There is water everywhere." "I'll be back in 2 days," I said. "That's not good enough," she screamed. "This is an emergency. The HOA is taking emergency action to contain this threat. You've left us no choice." She hung up. A deep sense of dread washed over me. What did she mean, emergency action? I tried to call her back, but she didn't answer. I drove home a day early, a knot of fear tightening in my gut with every mile. And that's when I came home to the concrete mixer, the workmen, and the smug, triumphant face of the woman who had just murdered my creek. I stood there for a long time, just staring. Marge kept chattering on about her decisiveness, her leadership, how she had solved the flooding problem once and for all. I didn't hear a word. My mind was a maelstrom of grief and fury. The ecosystem that had taken centuries to form, destroyed in 2 days by a woman with a checkbook and a bottomless well of arrogant ignorance. It felt like she had one. She had taken the heart of my property and encased it in concrete. The fight was over. We had destroyed the very thing we were fighting about. I was devastated that night as the silence of my property pressed in on me anew. Dead silence, devoid of the familiar chorus of the creek. My devastation slowly began to curdle. It cooled, it hardened, and it sharpened into a single cold, crystalline thought. She thinks she solved a flooding problem? She has no idea what a flooding problem looks like. She thinks she contained the water? She doesn't understand. You can't contain water, you can only redirect it. And she had just handed me the switch to redirect a catastrophe right into her own backyard. The anger was gone, placed by a cold, methodical calm. My hydrologist's brain, dormant for years, came roaring back to life. I walked out in the moonlight, up to the edge of my spring-fed pond. There, half hidden by ferns, was the old caster and wheel of the sluice gate my grandfather had installed 70 years ago. It controlled the entire outflow of the pond into the creek. For years I had left it exactly halfway open, allowing a steady, gentle flow. I put my hands on the cold iron. It was stiff, but it moved. With a deep, groaning sound, I began to turn the wheel, counterclockwise. I didn't stop until the gate was completely, totally sealed shut. The flow of spring water into the new concrete channel slowed to a trickle, and then stopped entirely. The trap was set. For the next few days, nothing happened. The sun shone. The residents of Chateau Valley admired their new, neat concrete drainage ditch, but I knew what was happening underground. The hundreds of illegal drainage pipes from their perfect lawns and streets were still emptying into that sealed concrete box. But now, with no spring-fed current to carry their runoff away, the water was just sitting there, stagnant, waiting. A week later, the first big rainstorm of the season rolled in. It wasn't as big as the last one, just a good, steady all day soaker. But this time, there was no creek to carry the water away. The concrete channel, already half full of their own lawn sprinkler and storm drain runoff, filled to the brim in less than an hour. Then, it began to back up. The first signs were subtle. The multi-million-dollar Chateau Valley Central Park, a low-lying area with a charming little gazebo, became a shallow, muddy lake. Then, the lawns began to change. The perfectly manicured zoysia grass, usually so firm, became soft and squelchy. Puddles formed and didn't disappear. Their entire community was sitting on a clay basin, and I had just plugged the only drain. The water table was rising. Marge and the HOA were in a panic. They called in landscape architects and engineers who were baffled. They couldn't figure out why the area was suddenly retaining so much water. They blamed the storm. They blamed the soil. They never once looked at their own handiwork, the concrete scar that had severed the land's natural circulation. And then, I made my move. I didn't call Marge. I didn't call the HOA. I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the state's Department of Environmental Protection. The second was to the regional office of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I reported as a private citizen the illegal, unpermitted damming and channelization of a natural, spring-fed waterway, a direct tributary to the larger river downstream. I used all the right keywords: destruction of a federally protected wetland ecosystem, unpermitted modification of a water of the United States, violation of the Clean Water Act. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 days later, a convoy of dark government SUVs rolled into Chateau Valley. Men and women in official jackets, carrying clipboards and testing equipment, swarmed the area. Marge, seeing them, must have thought they were her saviors, the government finally arriving to help her with her mysterious flooding problem. She ran out to meet them, a bright smile on her face. I was there too. I had called them and told them I would be available. I stood on my property line, my arms full of documents, the original topographical maps, the developer's drainage plans I had downloaded, a thick photo album filled with pictures of my beautiful living creek from before, and a video of Marge, proudly claiming responsibility for the construction, the lead investigator. A serious-looking woman from the Army Corps of Engineers listened patiently as Marge proudly showed off her beautification project. "We had a terrible flooding issue from this filthy ditch," Marge explained, "so I had it contained. We solved the problem." The investigator's face was a mask of cold, professional horror. She looked from the concrete trough to the swampy, waterlogged park behind Marge. "Ma'am," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "you didn't solve a problem, you've created a catastrophe." That's when I stepped forward. I introduced myself and laid my evidence out on the hood of one of the SUVs. I calmly, methodically explained the hydrology of the area. I showed them the developer's plans, proving that the creek was the sole drainage point for the entire development. I showed them the photos of the thriving wetland ecosystem she had destroyed. The investigator looked at my evidence, then back at Marge. "Ma'am," she said, "did you obtain a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers for this work? Did you conduct an environmental impact study? Did you get approval from the state DEP?" Marge just stared, her face finally starting to register the depth of the trouble she was in. It was an emergency," she stammered. "What you did," the investigator said, her voice like cracking ice, "was illegally destroy a federally protected waterway. The fines for this begin at $57,000 per day. Retroactive to the day the concrete was poured, Marge's world collapsed in that single moment. Her face went from a confident red to a ghostly, translucent white dot. The investigator wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she said, gesturing to the soggy lawns in the flooded park, "your development's entire drainage system appears to be illegal. And by filling in this creek, you have effectively plugged your own drain. You have created a self-inflicted permanent floodplain that has likely compromised the structural integrity of the foundations of every single home in this neighborhood. The cost of remediation, of jackhammering out this concrete and restoring the natural creek bed, will be astronomical. And your HOA will be responsible for every penny." She was utterly, completely and apocalyptically defeated. She was facing millions in federal fines, a massive lawsuit from every single one of her own residents, and the scorn of the entire community she had tried so desperately to control. The HOA was forced into bankruptcy by the fines and the lawsuits. A state-appointed receiver took over the management of Chateau Valley, their first and most expensive task being the multi-million-dollar project to jackhammer out Marge's concrete tomb and, under the strict supervision of the Army Corps of Engineers, restore my creek bed. Marge and her husband sold their house at a massive loss and moved away in the dead of night. The creek is slowly coming back to life. The cattails are growing back. The minnows have returned. And last night, for the first time in a long time, I heard the frogs singing again. As a whole nightmare taught me a powerful lesson. Nature has its own rules, laws that are far older and more powerful than any HOA by law. Marge, in her arrogance, thought she could pave over a living ecosystem to suit her sterile aesthetic. She didn't understand that you can't just get rid of water, it always wins. By trying to destroy my creek, she only succeeded in redirecting a disaster of her own making right into her own backyard. The creek is slowly coming back to life. The frogs are louder than ever. But now I get official, registered letters from the new HOA receiver every time I make a minor adjustment to my sluice gate, respectfully asking for a 30-day projection of downstream flow rates.